segment, we're going to introduce you to our talking head, our robot, who's going to do our segment changes.
I want to introduce you to our next segment. This one is titled Word of the Day. The next segment is the genealogy topic.
We want to give the geographical layout of the ancient map that we're using. In this ancient map, the continent of Eden was changed. The name was actually changed to the continent of Africa, but it began the generations of genealogy.
The research that we are presenting on the lineage from Shem to Abram, later called Abraham, is Genesis 11:26 through 32, if you want.
At age 100, Shem fathered Arapshad, and Shem actually lived 500 years. Okay.
Shelah, and Arapshad lived 400 years. At age 30, Shelah fathered Eber, and Shelah lived 430 years. At age 34, Eber fathered Peleg. Eber lived 430 years. At age 30, Peleg fathered Reu, and Peleg lived 200 years. At age 30, Reu fathered Serug. Reu lived 207 years. At age 30, Serug fathered Nahor, and Serug lived 200 years. At age 70, Terah fathered Abram. Terah lived 205 years. The seed of Abraham is a more in-depth seed, but we know on the chart that you see Abraham fathered Ishmael and Isaac, and from Isaac is the seed of Jacob. From Jacob is the seed of the 12 tribes of Israel. Importantly, Joseph was from that lineage, and from that lineage is also Christ, our Savior today. And we have the blessedness of that lineage because Christ is our living Savior. And we'll go more in depth on Abraham's lineage as we go forward. Thank you.
We want to thank you for our next segment. The focus of this segment is called Talking Heads, Trending Truth. Let's get started.
Okay, and we're going to move forward now to the next segment. We want to thank you for sticking with us on this. The next segment we call our trending truths. What are some of the trending truths that still stand that we would bring discussion about today? And I want to begin with kind of setting the foundation of the United States Constitution as a person that has lived in this country, was born in this nation. The Constitution, of course, is the document that we and those that came over from the transatlantic tribal nations, transatlantic slave trade, were forced actually to live under. But now the entrance into this country doesn't give much credence for those the Native American tribes who were already in the land before the descendant of the immigrants who came to, we're told Columbus came to explore the land, but there were people already here. There was a society that was already existing. And so the immigrants, which is why it's called an immigrant nation today, which came here, were not in the land prior to that. They were Native Americans were the nations that were in this land. And there are also definite connections to the Native Americans and the 12 tribes. The 12 tribes, and we'll get into more of that connection later. But right now, let's talk about the United States Constitution. What does it say? I want to begin with that because we're going to just dissect it just a little bit. The United States Constitution, and the point that we want to focus on out of that is that we the people, established as one, a group of human beings that are called people. Certainly, there's been some turning upside down of that, and we'll get on that point just a few minutes from now. But we the people is important to note because it is the people of the land in which the Constitution was written. And capitalism will speak to a different version of that, which brings us to where we are today. But it's basically its preamble simply says, "We the people of the U.S., in order to form a more perfect union, establish," and these are the keys that I want to pull forth: justice, one; ensure domestic tranquility, the ability to live in peace; two; provide for the common defense; three; common defense, the safety of all of its citizens; five; promote the general welfare, taking a position that those that all would receive that the nation itself would promote general support of its citizens, and that certainly would not mean that you would be doing what slavery in the years of slavery would have done. But we'll kind of look at that in detail. And then number five, secure the blessings of liberty. To it, the Constitution preamble says, to ourselves and our posterity, and then finally to ordain and establish. So these are the pieces that I want to bring forth and take a few minutes to just digress and digest on it. When we look at the Constitution and we look at where we are today, then the question is what really in the years of this nation have we been able to accomplish that we can really call a success? There are many nations in the earth today, and overcoming the challenges and growing and maturing as a nation should have the resemblance of a level of maturity, the effectiveness of a society that has overcome some things, that has grown up and is no longer dealing with the issues that it claims that it wanted to deal with in its constitution. So let's talk about the very first one that I want to elaborate on, and that is that the question one could ask itself is how has the nation dealt with its impact upon the descendants of the transatlantic slavery Holocaust peoples that ran from 1619 to the first written document that was going to begin to look at the issue in attempts to try and resolve the issue in 1863. So we had the 13th Amendment, which was implemented in 1865. That's what abolished the Emancipation Proclamation, and that was 244 years ago. 244 years ago. Let's make note of that. And then we want to note that what when we think about where we are today and we look at the social environment under which these descendants live today, we look at the economic, the social, and we go back to the Constitution and we talk about effectively implementing establishing justice, effectively ensuring domestic tranquility, effectively providing for the common defense, effectively promoting the general welfare, and securing the blessings of liberty. When we look at that, I think the question that I want us to think about is how has this nation done in the last 244 years in abolishing the negatives that those factors in the Constitution have had against this particular group, the transatlantic slavery Holocaust victims, right? And we also want to make sure that when we use the word victim, it is only because we're using it in the context of the Constitution. When we look at the biblical ancestral answers to this transatlantic slave um, journey, Holocaust, we know that the Bible gives us, as descendants of the biblical heritage of our ancestors, the explanation to this period that was limited, where there was going to be suffering of generations that preceded our ancestors, which involved us. This suffering was because of disobedience from those ancestors who deviated from the Bible's constitution, because we understand that the Bible, the way it was written, was a constitution for all of humanity. And that was all that our ancestors and those who were brought over from the transatlantic slavery, Holocaust, um, knew. And so we had an obligation to the Constitution that was written for us by God, and the patriarchs and matriarchs that were given the responsibility of writing that. So there was another Constitution by which we had to abide, and there was that the failure to live up to that properly, that there was a punishment that was involved. So we understand that there are two sides now. When we say victim, we also know that there's a responsibility and accountability for anyone who defies their creator. And so there is that whole process is being brought, and we must understand that. We don't want to look at people's actions, especially those of the people of this nation, and be absent of our own biblical constitution. There was a constitution written by the United States at that time government, but there was also a constitution that had been written before then. So let's make sure that we, clarify that whenever we're talking about this. Now let's move on, because we want to. There's another segment of this nation that I want us to look at, and this is just in order to draw an analogy to what apparently could have been done, but what wasn't done, and why then our Constitution explains to us the reward for us is different from the reward for those who choose different options. In other words, we've got the U.S. Constitution, but the Bible Constitution gives us a better explanation of our experience. Let's look at the descendants of the German Holocaust, which was in 1933 through, I think, in 1945. We look at the same Constitution for this particular segment of people in this nation, and we can contrast the preamble, which says in the Constitution to establish justice, and we look at that and we say, well, has justice been established? Has domestic tranquility been established for these people of the Holocaust, the German Holocaust? Has there been a provision of common defense for these people? Has the promotion of general welfare, the security of blessings of liberty all been established? And if so, how well has this nation done in doing so? So we can kind of parallel those two. And I think anybody who is being honest with themselves can see that there is an ability to know how to do, but then there is a choice that has been made to not do. And you look at just these two segments, those of the Holocaust of the transatlantic slavery people, the Holocaust of the German Holocaust. Two significance that I want to point out. The transatlantic slavery Holocaust was a Holocaust that happened on the grounds in this nation, that's in the Americas. The German Holocaust was one that did not happen in the grounds of the Americas. And so the transfer of the understanding as to why the outcomes look the way that they do leaves one to question what was the obligation there? Was there an obligation to both equally, or was there an obligation to one And how has that obligation been fulfilled as opposed to an obligation to another? How has that one been fulfilled? So those are the questions I want to leave with you to think about. Let's go on down because we're at another significant milestone in this nation, and that is the presidential election. We've got a two-party system. And it's funny because as I was doing research for this particular podcast, I found out that um, the party systems in this country and the symbols, the logos that they use were both created by a cartoonist. It was a cartoonist who decided that the elephant image would represent the Republican mascot, and the donkey image would represent the Democrat mascot in this nation. And the vetting didn't go beyond that. It has stood with the cartoonist interpretation of those since. And I thought that was quite ironic that a cartoonist would decide. In other words, I would have thought that maybe more depth that would have gone into preparing something that would align itself more with substance in the society than a cartoonist creating images and the party continuing down that line of cartoon images as its representation for the political structure and the governmental statutes under which the political systems would then decide how they're going to choose what priorities and policies they would use. So thought that one was funny. Next, we want to just understand in simple form, governments were, according to the Constitution, we the people, established for the people. And then we're going to have to touch on capitalism real briefly here. But what I came back with in looking at the two-party systems and their philosophical beliefs, their policy-driven beliefs, is that one is against regulation and another might be for some regulation. So this whole idea of regulation then became prominent. That led me to the question of capitalism. What is capitalism? Is it good? Is it bad? How does it seem to you in this particular sphere of time of the age of humanity? On the surface, it would seem that it would be a good thing. But if it is not regulated, then is it really good? Because if the government had not been established, and I'm gonna kind of deviate here and go to the descendants of the transatlantic slavery holocaust, because it was the requirement that was necessary for government to step in order for the abuse of the Constitution against these people to stop. So the government had to be established in support of the people to stop the abuse that was going on, because the abuse that was going on was certainly against the Constitution. It was against justice. It was against domestic tranquility. It was against providing for common defense. So against general welfare, everything that the transatlantic Holocaust represented, it was really against the Constitution. And so the government being established had to come in order to protect the people, because those who were causing the infractions against the transatlantic slavery Holocaust members of its society were, the Confederate section of the Constitution. I think this one that we spoke about was abolished in 1861. But Section 2 of that very document designated those of the transatlantic slavery Holocaust as 3/5 of a person under Article 8 of the Constitution. And so you've got this grievous infraction going on in a Constitution that is supposed to protect its people. And then you move that down into now the infrastructure of the society. And in the infrastructure, we're being driven by this term called capitalism. And if you've already got infractions going on, then you have to have a government that will step in order to bring to bear the proper responsibilities and bring people to accountability who are not living according to the rules of the society. So capitalism, I think, has to fit into that, because when the Constitution was written, it was written in order to regulate, right? Regulate the behavior of the people. And so regulation for capitalism can follow in the same vein of necessity as the Constitution's regulation of human behaviors, right? Except capitalism represents the business side, right, of the society. Businesses privately owning land, being able to generate products. So all of these are falling under capitalism. And so as long as that is regulated, it would seem that people have to deal fairly with it. Then it makes sense. It's a good thing. But if there is no regulation, then the question of who owns private property, who controls the private property and the factors of production, who can accumulate capital and wealth, who gets to compete fairly. Well, without any regulation, what we have is this, you got to ask yourself the question, does capitalism really work? Because the deregulators, those who don't want regulation, versus those who do want regulation, is kind of the platforms of these two-party systems. However, I don't know that there's a big difference today in that, because what has happened is that the lack of regulation, the lack of government influence in society has almost dwindled to probably, I won't say totally ineffective, but it's not as effective as it should be, nor is it as effective because we have to ask ourselves the question, where we are today? How far along are we in really living up to the document of the institution of this nation, right? And if we haven't made it, then of course there's a lot wrong. So I don't think it takes much for us to look around to see that there's a lot wrong. And I think we keep getting into conversations that are not really conversations that are relevant to changing the basic components of how we measure ourselves against the Constitution. On the other hand, the Bible's Constitution is the other place that we go. So we look at capitalism, we look at the Constitution, and let's go now to the Bible's Constitution. There are these crosshairs with the Constitution of the U.S. and the Constitution of the Bible. So I thought, well, let's just look at these two. The Bible's Constitution and God. Who is that God? I am that I am. The Constitution, somewhere along the line, they thought it necessary in the U.S. to say, "In God we trust." So that means that they were adopting the Bible's Constitution in that the terms that they come up with. If you're aligning yourself with the higher power, you're talking about justice, you're talking about the wealth of the wealth building and the wealth of others, the welfare of others. These are concepts then that were pulled from the Bible's Constitution. Justice, right? Justice versus do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So these analogies are biblically sound, and they were laid for a foundation of humanity. And somewhere along the line, those that put the Constitution together thought they were important, right? Domestic tranquility versus do not lie, do not kill, do not steal, do not covet or destroy. Next aspect, common defense versus do not covet the possessions of others, right? Protecting the poor, the general welfare, right? Everyone pay their fair share. This is the tax system to the government. Why? Because you have to protect your poor, your widows, and your children. These are the two concepts of the United States Constitution and the Bible's Constitution. And if these are in truth what they were supposed to be, we can honestly measure ourselves and measure the nation's performance. And where we are today would help us to understand that. Corporate, the welfare. There are two other aspects I think that are really important. When we hear the word welfare, corporate government welfare, what does that look like? Those are your contracts that are being given with to businesses. They are subsidies that are being given to business. When a business comes into a new area and they are being given a subsidy in a community, that subsidy is eliminating their tax liability. It's eliminating their employer required liabilities. And so if there is no regulation to make sure that those things are there, then I think we can see what happens, what we got going on today. On the government's ability to honor the Constitution in making sure that the welfare of the children and the poor and the widows are also taken care of properly is really affected by the general welfare and the government's lack of regulating the welfare that business must provide, right? So when we think about the Patriot Act, for example, the Patriot Act then flipped the script on the entire Constitution, and nobody seems to really care about it, which said that businesses can now be people. So when you make that kind of change to your Constitution and look down the road, you can see the effects on the society. So that's kind of the gist of what I wanted to just discuss today, and we'll get a chance to come back and revisit this. And I hope you'll, give me some comments and some feedback on your opinions of this particular topic. We're going to go live. We just haven't. This one won't be live, but please share whether you like the content. We've covered a lot, and I certainly appreciate and thank you very much for listening in on today's episode. Thank you, and have a great and blessed day. We'll see you again next episode next week.